Yep.
Right. I am having a really great chat already, and we've only just met each other with Jerry Bryant. Um, he's been described as, one of those jack of all trades, and that is for sure. A classical musician, jazz musician, attorney. We'll talk about that. Um,
Yeah.
and a man, obviously, who is very committed to serving his community in many, many ways. I'm very,
Yes.
very impressed with that.
I am
But
so pleased to be interviewed by Dan, and I have to tell our viewing audience that I consider Dan to be a kindred spirit, even though we first met just now. But we've communicated back and forth, and he's just a very impressive, cool, and wonderful guy himself. So and I like to think of myself in the same terms. So anyway, so
you see
go
what
ahead, Dan.
you
I had to give you a plug.
see what bribery will do. I mean, it's just
Right,
quite amazing.
exactly.
What we're going to talk about, we're going to touch on very briefly. Have just finished reviewing finally in the stack of CDs I'm trying to get through. His what the first of three CDs that I'll be reviewing
Hmm.
for Jerry. This one is called Interpretations from what is it? 2013, I think, is when that CD was released.
Um, yeah, that
Something like
seems
that.
seems right. Right, right.
Uh, and in a way, this first CD that I'll be reviewing of Jerry's really speaks to something we're going to talk about later, and I'll show you why, everybody. 15 tracks on this CD, lots of original works, original arrangements, original pieces that Jerry has composed, and then a potpourri. Themes from Phantom of the Opera, melody from the theme from the movie 10, Sunshine on My Shoulders, Vie en Rose. I mean,
Right.
and then a little Chopin, a little meditation from Thais. This is called eclecticism big time, and
Very eclectic. Yes.
and it's
Very
what we're going to talk about.
unfocused.
No,
Right.
no, not at all. It's focused on what we're going to discuss in a bit.
Okay.
Um, but I find that Jerry Bryant is in Los Angeles, based in Los Angeles, and is doing a ton and a half of good works. Remind me to ask you how you snuck into Disney Hall. I need to know about that, and whether I can hold you hold
Oh,
you in some
yeah,
way with
yeah.
that.
Please don't tell too many people that.
But let's talk about beginnings because you
Okay.
have quite an amazing story, and it is very important for people to know about. Uh,
I
Go.
oh,
Let me do an
I'll
overview
listen.
here. We're talking about a
Okay.
kid from the inner city in Cleveland, yeah,
Right.
who, with a passion for classical music, how you got through the neighborhood without being, attacked. I don't
That's
know. You'll talk
that's
about
a
that.
that's a good question.
And then moving on to Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts, and
Hmm.
Harvard. Give
Hmm.
me a break. Go.
Uh,
Tell me the story.
I've been very fortunate. Yes, I come from very humble beginnings, poor neighborhood in Cleveland, and I just had an affinity for classical music. My piano teacher, Ethel Morton, was very versatile, and she was an amazing classical pianist, a black woman, older black woman, amazing classical pianist, and she played in the church, black church, gospel music. She did all of these different things. But I was, for whatever reason, from the very beginning, just so drawn to classical music. And the amazing thing is, in my family, there are no musicians in my family. My parents had basically a ninth grade education. And so classical music was just not something that you ever heard in the neighborhood. Indeed, when I was taking piano lessons, and my running buddies down, they would always rib me and say, "Jerry, what are you doing? Come on out here," and basically get into trouble. But you would never hear classical music. But I was fortunate; I was exposed to a couple of things in school. As a child, I was exposed to actually the Cleveland Orchestra and George Zell. Obviously, and you can't go anywhere any worse than that. And that just it spoke to me. It really resonated with me. So I was just playing classical music, and my intention was to basically be a concert pianist and conductor, and that's where I was going. That's where I was headed.
I'm so glad you
Uh,
didn't get there. It's hard enough. Sorry, I couldn't resist.
well, well, no, I wouldn't have made it. Well, because you would have been competition, and I just couldn't live up to your competition. So there you go. Um, but then what happened? I was fortunate. I was actually a fairly bright kid, so I got an academic scholarship to Phillips Andover Academy. And I had, coming from my background, I had no knowledge of prep schools, of Andover, or anything like that. And so this was a major culture shock for me, going to a school,
Mm,
coming basically from an inner city to a basically all white,
yeah.
upper class um, academic institution. But there, it turns out that that actually was for me and for my life just something that turned my life around, because I was able to go from there and to do a variety of things. But what I wanted to mention from a musical standpoint, I was then I took piano lessons from Albion Metcalf, and Albion
Yes.
Metcalf well, taught at Andover, but he also was I guess, the main piano teacher at the New England Conservatory of Music at that time. And he, as a matter of fact, he was a pupil of Tobias Matei, who was
Yes.
you probably know who that
Yeah.
is, world-renowned piano teacher who had talked about specific methods that I use to this day in terms of releasing tension and performing.
Mm.
So anyway, so I was playing classical music at Andover. Oh, and I have a very funny story I have to tell you real
Let me
quick.
just interrupt for 1 second.
Sure,
I wonder if you could pull back just a little bit from the
sure.
screen, or are you holding the iPhone? Is it an iPhone or?
Oh, it's an iPhone,
Things are
and
a little shaky, and it also
okay,
my experience is that if I don't get you back a little bit, I'm gonna lose your chin. Yeah,
gotcha.
that's
Okay,
better. That's
okay.
better. Besides, I
See,
like your outfits. I've been at your
oh,
website. Everything you wear looks great. Go ahead.
oh, well, thank you, thank you. Yeah, I'm trying to hold this phone steadily because I happen to be. I think I was Italian because I speak using my hands a lot, and so I tend to do that holding this phone. So I will try to stop
Yeah,
doing that.
just paralyze
Um,
it. Just and we're set. Okay.
and so interrupt me if I do that again.
Okay.
Um, but at Andover, at one point, the leader of the orchestra at Andover wanted me to play a piece with the orchestra at the end of the year, and the piece was Grieg's Concerto in A minor. And so, to give me inspiration and incentive to learn that piece, he gave me the album of that particular piece. Actually, it was albums back then, not CDs. And performing that piece was Arthur Rubinstein.
Ah.
Okay, so I get this album, I go home, go to my room, and I listen to it. And my reaction, it had the exact opposite
Hmm.
reaction. I thought, oh God, no. Why am I even playing the piano, taking any lessons? Because Arthur Rubinstein obviously was who he is
Yeah.
or was. And listening to him just going up and down the keyboards just with a flourish and with such emotion. And I knew that, what the hell am I doing? And so I went back to the orchestra. I told him, I don't want to curse because it was kind of oh, hell no. I'm sorry, but I am not doing this. As a matter of fact, I am not taking piano lessons anymore. I am giving up the piano. So it's kind of ironic that what should be an inspiration turned out to be, for that, turned out to just completely intimidate me. So I didn't do that. But I managed to keep playing, taking lessons. And so then I graduated, went on to Harvard, and interesting. I mean, the reason, and fortunately I got a scholarship from Harvard. I was actually
It's
a
amazing.
smart kid.
It's
I've
amazing.
lost all of it through the years, but I was smart at that time. Oh, and interesting. So at Andover, one of my classmates who also took piano lessons from Albion Metcalf is
You
David
mentioned.
Cunliffe,
Yeah, you mentioned.
who is a jazz pianist, and uh, noted jazz pianist. Bill Cunliffe, I'm sorry, noted jazz pianist who lives here in L.A., and he's world renowned. Interesting enough. So then I go to Harvard, and during this time was when I was more exposed to jazz as a genre of music. And even though through the years, I mean, I've been listening to all sorts of music, but in terms of my passion, it's been classical music. So I grew up with the Beatles and the Motown and all of that playing. But and then I started became exposed to some jazz musicians from Ramsey Lewis, Nat King Cole, and some others, which really also resonated with me. And so then I couldn't figure out how, but I wanted to combine and learn how to play like that in addition to my classical performing. And so when I went to Harvard, at that point, I was hoping, and I went to Harvard because I got into Harvard, and I figured, well, hey, if you get into Harvard, you should go to Harvard.
Yeah, are you kidding?
Rather,
Talk about salary increases on the
well,
outside.
exactly, exactly. Although I had applied to Juilliard and some other places, but I once I got into Harvard, I thought, well, let me go there. The thing is, Harvard was not known then for its music department, and it definitely was not known. It did not have any sort of jazz curriculum. I will say though that although I started majoring in music, since their music department uh, wasn't going to help me reach my aspirations,
Watch it
I
now.
stopped doing that. But I have to say that one of my classmates majored in music at Harvard, and he did quite well for himself. You might know who he is, Yo-Yo Ma.
You just drop names right, left, and center. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, really. Those are the only two people I know, so those are the only names I'll drop.
That's enough.
But so, but from there, in order for whereas with classical music, that was a learned experience from taking piano lessons. I took composition, harmony, and counterpoint as a child, so I was really just entrenched um, academically with classical music. At Harvard, though, in order to learn about jazz and some other music, I ended up doing what a lot of the well-known jazz musicians used to do in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and that is they weren't academically trained. They actually went out, listened to the music, went to as many clubs as they could do, and then sat in with as many people as they could in learning the music. And oftentimes they got embarrassed because they would go and sit on stage, and if they couldn't hold their own, then they would, the other musicians would just ostracize them, basically. So that's how you learned, and so
Yeah.
that's actually how I learned jazz when I was at Harvard. I not through anything at the school, but I would go to clubs. I actually was in a group that was fun. We were a sort of an R&B slash rock slash jazz group, and so we performed around. So it was through that process, literally by learning on my own
Mm.
how to play jazz, and so that's why my music at today is, as we were talking about earlier, just before we came on, is a synthesis of sort of classical and jazz, and the term that I use, even though I don't like to be to think that I'm worthy of the term, but in 1957, the renowned composer Gunther Schuller termed this phrase a third stream, and that third stream basically means a synthesis of classical music and jazz. And so that's actually very, very broad. You can think of going way back from Gershwin, obviously, who, I mean, combined those elements. But you can look at some modern classical composers today that can combine the elements. So it doesn't
Yes. Yeah.
there are all sorts of different ways to do that. My music, as you've listened to, and hopefully some of the viewers will also listen to some of it. Also, at least my personal music that I compose. Um, since I listen to so much classical music, as a matter of fact, I listen to more classical music
Hmm.
than I do anything else. To this day, so my music is infused, obviously, with classical. What's a good word for it? Obviously, an influence. And then the
Maybe
jazz,
discipline might be
discipline, yes,
a little bit of
discipline, but
that
also
classical
just in
discipline.
terms the classical discipline, but also in terms of harmonically.
Uh-huh.
Because with jazz, I would say that my music reflects a jazz influence and tendencies and sort of subtleties. But I don't consider myself to be a jazz pianist. I would love to be, but it's the same sort of thing when I was listening to Arthur Rubinstein, thinking, "Oh God, I could never be that way." So when you think of a jazz pianist, you think of the Herbie Hancocks, Keith Jarrett, all these
Same
amazing
thing,
people.
yeah, same
Yeah,
thing, really.
exactly. Oh God, whenever I go to one of their concerts, it's funny. Even though, I mean, I love it and I'm just so enthralled, but I walk away thinking, I'm not touching the piano anymore in life. I mean, what's the point? so, so,
Well, you answered my second question about improvisation
okay.
very interestingly, because I figured maybe you had just had this since you were a tiny kid, because I can't
Yes.
improvise to save my soul except in the shower. Somehow I can improvise, literally I can improvise in the shower, but
Okay.
on the
Okay.
keyboard or on my
Okay.
clarinet I used to play here. Can't do it. We're gonna have to move on because
Sure.
time's going by.
Sure.
But now at a certain point you made a very intelligent and life changing decision to get your jurisprudence, to get your law degree,
Yes.
and to get a
Yes.
master's of business administration. And those of us who are musicians are thinking, why didn't I think of that? Go,
Yes.
tell me about
Yes.
that.
Yeah, absolutely. I did that for two reasons mainly. One is because knowing that I was and still am a musician, and being a musician in the business, most musicians and artists of all different stripes don't understand the
Yeah,
business or of their art.
yeah,
And so I wanted to make sure that I understood from a legal and business standpoint everything that I was doing so that basically, so I would never get ripped off because
yeah,
you hear about it all the time, musicians, artists getting ripped off by unscrupulous people. So I wanted to have that knowledge. Now, mind you, I basically I think it's overkill because all one really needs, I have since found out, is to have some general knowledge, but then surround yourself with people who are experts in whatever area and people that you trust. So you surround yourself with expert lawyers, managers, publicists, or whatever, but people that trust that you have trust in and that really believe in your music. But me, I wanted to do everything. I wanted to control everything. So I figured, okay, let me get a law degree. I'm going to Harvard, get a law degree, and go to UCLA, get an MBA, do all of this. I got out of school, was working for a big, prestigious entertainment law firm to learn all of this. And then for a couple of years, and then I struck out basically on my own, doing my own thing. That was the main reason, but also because, as you know, as a musician, and especially doing either jazz or classical music or whatever, unless you are a world-renowned Yo-Yo Ma or someone like that, lots of times you are struggling, or one is struggling in this business. So I always wanted to also know that I had something to fall back on when times were lean, and times have been lean in doing my music. Because I tell people all the time, it's too bad I'm not playing or composing Beyonce music, because then I wouldn't have any issues. But that's not what I do.
yeah.
So so that's another reason. So I have the law degree to fall back on, which is so I've been practicing law, arts and entertainment law. And the third thing is actually related to all of this is that I wanted to, and I never intended to actually do the amount of law that I've been doing at all. I just intended to just be a lawyer for myself. But lo and behold, as you know, life takes you in all sorts of different paths, whether you want to go down those paths or not. And so I've done a lot of law. I've represented musicians, artists, art galleries, theater groups, arts organizations, all sorts of things through the years. And it's been great because I thoroughly believe in the creative arts. I believe in what artists do and how important what we do is to society and to the world. And so to be able to help other artists, be they musicians like yourself, composers, visual artists, to be able to help them to create their art so they don't get ripped off, and so they can then be able to do their thing with ease. That pleasures me, and that's one of the main reasons why I continue to do what I do as a lawyer in the arts and
Yeah.
entertainment industry.
California Lawyers for the Arts, very involved.
Yes,
Yeah.
Yes,
Very
California Lawyers for the
important.
Arts is it's a statewide organization that's a nonprofit. It is a great organization. The mission of California Lawyers for the Arts is to empower and educate artists of all different stripes. And the irony is, so I've been on the board of California Lawyers for the Arts for decades, and president of the board for a long time. But Lawyers for the Arts does exactly what I thought that I needed to do when I was basically getting my career going and in school, and that is having some organization or whatever that teaches and empowers artists so that they are educated about the business of their art. And that's exactly what California Lawyers for the Arts does in a very, very low cost way because we're supported by grants and so forth. It's a great organization.
And very, very important for all of us in the arts. We all need help there, frankly, most of us, really, myself included.
Absolutely. Yes.
I'm old enough now that I've learned a trick or two, but the point is
Right.
that as you said, it's a very difficult profession. It's a long, hard struggle. I'm still struggling, and I'm 70. There are ups, there are downs. Part of me
Absolutely. Yes.
said to
Yes.
myself, why? As I said, why didn't I do that so I could, have something to fall back on? Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Right.
Very, very important service you're doing, and you do so much else in the Los Angeles area, social services with social service groups, the hospital. It's an amazing commitment you have to your community, and I think it's part of what your whole life has been. That's why I'm very impressed with you.
Oh,
Okay.
well, thank you. I mean, I'm so impressed by creative people because creative people have a sensibility of both a sensibility and a and empathy and sympathy to everyone else. And that's something that in I mean, in the legal profession, we can go wax on and on about lawyers. And I tell people that I personally don't like lawyers. But then again, since I am a lawyer, that must show that I have some sort of self-hatred going on or something. But artists, for me to be able to assist artists in
Yeah.
whatever way, and to be able to play music, to write music that
Yeah.
people can relate to. I mean, there's as you know, there's nothing like it. There's nothing
Yeah.
like it. All these other things that we do, that you do, that I do, they're wonderful. But there's nothing like really creating something and having people be inspired by it, enjoy it, or whatever. Nothing compares.
We're going to run it down here because we're over our time limit for
Oh,
people's
okay, okay,
attention span. But I want to ask you one very important question.
sure.
Obviously, you have we've talked about it earlier, but a very positive attitude and philosophy. Where'd it come from? Have any idea?
I have no idea, Dan. I give credit to my parents for everything that I've done, and even though, again, they only had a ninth grade education. I think my mother actually did graduate from high school, but they had no knowledge of classical music. Since passed away, but and they couldn't relate to what I was doing at all. But they nurtured me, and they
Mm.
nurtured all of us kids, and so I give them full credit for everything. And so, I don't know. It's just the way that I am.
So we know plenty is up for you in that part of your career. What's up musically? Anything coming up?
Actually, I just finished my latest CD, which I will want you to listen to and also to review, called Rhapsodic, which
Mm.
I'm very, very pleased with. It's very
Nice
similar
title.
to my other CDs, but it has rhapsodies. A rhapsody that I wrote, a rhapsody by Haydn. That's one of my favorite rhapsodies. A rhapsody by Rachmaninoff's Rhapsody on the theme of Paganini, which I just love, a Rhapsody that I wrote, and some other things. And so that is just out, and I've got now working on my next one. I never look back. I keep moving forward.
Good grief. Indeed, very well put. And we're going to meet again. We have two more CDs to talk about. Let alone maybe the new one if you're not unhappy with my with
Right.
my
Yeah, watch
remarks.
what you say
Yeah,
there,
I'm okay.
Dan.
Jerry Bryant, what a spectacular person you are. It's very, very impressive, and I'm glad to meet you.
Oh,
I'm
my
glad to
pleasure, Dan.
serve you if I can, with
Ah,
in my humble way, giving some remarks about your CDs, and we'll meet each other again. I'm sure soon. I
yes, we
hope.
will.
Uh,
Let me say quickly
yeah,
as a pun. So we are doing FaceTime, but Dan, I can't wait to actually meet you face to face.
it'll happen. We're close enough. 90 miles. What can I say?
Okay, doke.
Thanks, Jerry. Bye.
Okay, thanks, Dan.